Okay, if you're having a hard time right now, struggling in one way or another, I hope this episode will be helpful to you. I call it 6 questions that help me when I'm struggling, and I hope they'll help you as well. Hi, it's Brian Sergio from the Big Love Spirituality Podcast, and this is episode 12, 6 questions that help me when I'm struggling. And I just wanted to put this episode together as something that might be some medicine for the soul, for the heart, for the psyche, for the mind, for the spirit when you're struggling in one way or another. These are the 6 questions that I have learned over the years to ask myself that help me get back on track and reconnect with the things that matter most. And so I'm hoping that this will be helpful to you or maybe somebody you love. So let's get right into it. The first question is first to just actually stop and notice. And the question is, what's going on? What's going on really? And one of the just important things is to be able to be self-aware enough to stop and name what's happening within ourselves. So rather than just to react or just kind of feel cranky or not feel right and take it out on other people or just not pay attention to it or try to ignore it or deny it, just stop. It's not a matter of wallowing in it, but just stop and say, okay, what's up? Then we have a chance to respond instead of react. And for me, sometimes it's not a big deal. Like, it might be something physical, for example. Maybe I'm just tired. In fact, I have learned that when I catch myself being irritable or resentful, when things that normally wouldn't bother me, but I'm resenting someone asking this of me, or I'm quicker to be impatient, I just say, okay, I'm tired. Either maybe haven't slept well or need a nap, or I've been in drive mode. I've been pushing myself too hard. And what I really need more than anything is to stop, to trust the universe enough to just say, okay, I can take a break or I can take a day off. And to remind myself not everything in the world is dependent upon me and my initiative. Just let go and take a deep breath and go out in nature or something beautiful. But it could just be that you're tired. Okay, so what's going on? Is it something physical? A lot of times for me, when I'm tired in the middle of the day and I'm tempted to get down on myself, okay, what's the matter with you? I realize I haven't been drinking enough water. I'm dehydrated. It's amazing how many times I have learned that if I take a nice glass of water or two in the middle of the day when I'm feeling tired, it's like I just watered a plant that was wilted, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, there's nothing wrong. I was just dehydrated. I need to drink more water. Pay attention to that. So it could be something physical. It could be something you ate. I mean, who knows? Okay, so what's going on really? But if it's not that, then okay, maybe you're just having a bad day for reasons you can't really articulate or put a finger on. And sometimes it's like you don't need to make a big deal out of that. We humans aren't always at our best for any number of reasons. Maybe you're just having a bad day. And when I started taking my spiritual journey seriously many years ago, for me now, it was when I was 17, but initially I had this sort of awakening, and I was like, everything went from black and white to color, and I was, oh, this is how life's going to be. And then all of a sudden, that initial rush of deepening in my soul and in my psyche, all of a sudden that went away, and I wasn't feeling that high of initial awareness. And I thought, what's the matter? Did God go away? Or, am I doing something wrong? And it's just that feelings ebb and flow. Sometimes for reasons we're not going to be able to name. We're just not at our best. Okay, so maybe that's all that's going on. It's possible. And I heard many years ago, this little analogy. Our emotional life is kind of like the weather. And that there are beautiful, clear blue sky days with the sun shining and it's just gorgeous and the temperature's just right. And then there are days when the clouds come out and they block the sun. And it's not that the sun went anywhere. And the clouds will disperse. The weather will change. So sometimes, the good old adage, the cliche, this too shall pass. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And just cut yourself a little slack and just say, okay, all right. Okay, so what's going on really? Maybe it's something along those lines. I've also, I am in recovery, and I'm going to say more about that later on in a 12-step program. I'm going to get into that a little bit in this episode. But there's an acronym that the AA world has that I have found really, really helpful. It's called HALT, HALT, and it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and a friend of mine added a B for boredom. HALT, B, or B HALT. Sometimes that's all it is that I'm hungry. I need something, or I'm lonely. And that can be a deep dive into what's really going on there. What am I really lonely for? Tired, I already mentioned. Angry. Okay, so what's really going on could be one of those things. But when I've looked at all of that, then I can also say maybe there's some sort of psychological thing going on. And most of us have some unresolved core wounds, patterns that usually go back to our childhood, and this is where some kind of therapy can be really, really helpful, to talk with someone who's trained to help us get to the heart or the roots of some of the issues that we have in our lives, and to be able to name them and work with them and see the patterns that have arisen out of them. So sometimes that's what's going on, and not feeling well or not feeling right is a way of saying, okay, those issues are kicking up and manifesting themselves, and it's time for me to take a deeper dive into some of those issues. And so, as I said, some professional help of some kind. And by the way, I'm available if you would really like to bounce some things around with me. I'm a trained counselor, etc. Be in touch. We could talk about that, some sort of one-on-one stuff virtually. But sometimes we just need some help to get to the heart of what's really going on, and we're not really clear what it is. All right, so there's that. But now, I'm going to shift into the second question. But before I do, I'm going to give thanks to Carl Jung, the depth psychologist Carl Jung, for two things that he said that I have come back to again and again in my life. The first was, he said, most of our psychological problems have spiritual solutions. Just chew on that one for a second. Most of our psychological issues have spiritual solutions. And then the second thing he said was, and when it comes to our core problems, we don't usually solve them. We outgrow them. So when you put those together, that means that our spiritual growth is incredibly important if we're going to get to the heart of some of the things that make life unnecessarily difficult for us, or that present us with the things that we necessarily need to learn how to work with and grow out of and grow through and learn from. So the second question is, where am I with my spiritual growth? And I'll be the first one to admit, when I'm not in a good place, and I struggle with all these things. That's how I know anything I know, is usually the hard way, the good old school of hard knocks. Most of what I have learned and have to offer anybody else, I learned the hard way by not getting things right. And as good old Richard Rohr, one of my favorite spiritual teachers, says, we learn more from getting it wrong than getting it right. And the spiritual journey, life, it's not about getting it right. It's about paying attention and growing and getting deeper and more true and more free, especially in the spirit, in the soul, I believe. So where am I in my spiritual growth? When I'm not in a good place, the question annoys me. So if that, you're like, oh crap, I don't want to go there. I get it. But maybe the fact that you don't want to go there, or haven't been willing to seriously ask yourself, who am I? Where am I spiritually? That could be at the heart of why you have recurring issues or problems that don't seem to ever get addressed or outgrown. So I'm going to share with you a scripture verse that has really helped me, so much so that I call it the key of Matthew 6:33. Or the key of 33, to make it succinct and easy to remember. Matthew, the book of the Gospel of Matthew in the Newer Testament in the Bible, it's the beginning of the New Testament. When you get to about the 5th chapter, there's this long sermon that really contains the heart of so many of Jesus' teachings. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. So well into that Sermon on the Mount, he starts talking about the reasons that a lot of people are anxious about their physical well-being, about having enough clothing and shelter and just the basic stuff we all need to survive. And Jesus, it's a very well-known common teaching. He says, look at the lilies of the field, how they neither toil nor spin, yet even King Solomon in all of his glory was not dressed up or arrayed, as the Bible puts it. Was not dressed up like one of these beautiful flowers. And yet they don't live that long and then they die, but God takes care of them. God dresses them up. Won't God take care of you and give you what you need? Don't worry about your clothing. And then he said the same with the birds of the air, and that God provides for them. All right, and then it all ends, though, with Jesus saying this, and this is the key, in Matthew 6, verse 33. He says, seek first the kingdom of God, is how he put it, and God's righteousness, and all these other things that you need will come to you, will be given to you. And I rephrase that usually, and I think a better translation after all these years and after I've really worked with it is seek first the consciousness of God. And God's righteousness, that word could also be translated justice, the right living, according to putting first things first. Seek first the consciousness of God, and then everything else falls into place, has a way of being given to you. You don't have to make it all happen. Just put God first. Now, before unpacking that a little bit with you, let's just say, for a lot of us, the real issue is we don't know if we believe in God or not at all. And all I know is that just being as honest and real with yourself right there as you possibly can be is the only way to get anywhere with that question. I call this the Big Love Spirituality Podcast because after studying Christianity and the Bible and going to seminary and giving my heart and soul to trying to understand these things and studying many other religions, it's all gotten very, very simple for me. As it says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, God is love. And for me, it really is that simple. In fact, when I was pastoring a church, we had a t-shirt that said, God is love. It really is that simple. And then I saw a video, as I've mentioned in other episodes, that Brene Brown did, and she mentioned the same thing. She said, God is love. It's that simple. And she said, and that complicated. Because living out the implications of putting love first above everything, it gets into everything and can be layered and nuanced and complicated. I get that. But what I'm really saying is if you have intellectually struggled with the way God has been presented to you, or goddess or source or creator, use whatever name or image works for you. I don't think the Big Love, one of my favorite names of God, I don't think the Big Love cares what we call him, her, it, them. Just call. And just be open to the presence of love within yourself and in your life. And for a lot of people, it's much easier to focus on love than on some personified being called God. And people have religious experiences as kids or organized religion that got in the way. Okay, so let go of all of that. And I'm just encouraging you to trust and focus on the presence of love as the source of what is ultimate in the universe. Love is the strongest force. It's the only thing that has the power to heal and transform and set us free at the root causes. And I believe that with all my heart, and that goes for our own personal lives, as well as injustice in the world, what the world needs for there to be peace and for wars to cease. It's all about choosing and trusting love. So, seek first the consciousness of God. Another way of saying it might be seek love first. So the third question is, am I seeking God or love first? And Another way of putting that might be more helpful is it's not about living up to a bunch of commandments or memorizing Bible verses or some code of ethics or something. If you turn it all into a bunch of rules, it loses its life. It's more about being in alignment with the flow and the rhythm and the current of love. So the question is, am I in alignment with love and with truth? Because I don't think you can have love without truth and vice versa. They're wrapped up with each other. So if the answer is, now if you honestly ask yourself, am I in alignment with what is most loving? And you ask that honestly and the answer is no, then that could be where you need to go in order to somehow come to terms with what feels off or what's not going well in your life or within yourself. In what ways are you out of alignment? Another way of asking that or getting at that is to say, am I doing anything that I know is wrong? Am I in a relationship that I know is not healthy? Am I pursuing this or that endeavor in business or finances or something, trying to get money somehow in a way that I know doesn't have integrity? Those are all ways that we can be out of alignment with love. Am I doing anything that I know is against my own deepest values? Am I cheating? Person in a business commitment? Am I somehow out of sync? And again, this is not about taking yourself on a guilt trip. It's about just being honest of, hey, what's off? What's out of sync? And what really needs attention and help? So I'm going to just use a personal example of why this is so important. I've been on this deep spiritual journey for most of my life now. I'm 68 years old right now, and this all started when I was 17, and I've been on a conscious spiritual journey. But to be honest, for a lot of those years, I used an illegal substance to get high. Sometimes a lot, sometimes periodically, but it got to a point where that was an addictive pattern in my life. And if you're watching this and this first time you've ever heard me talk about this or allude to this, sorry to disappoint you or to shock you, but it's the truth. And I refer to myself, looking back now, as a high-functioning addict. And by the way, there are lots of different ways to be addicted, right? You can be addicted to work. You can be addicted to shopping. You can be addicted to relationships. Lots of different ways in which you're doing something, pursuing something that you are not in control of, that's controlling you. But for me, there was a substance. And if you really want to know about this or you want to talk about this more, I'll do some more episodes about it at another time. But you can be in touch with me and we can communicate about it, especially if it will help you with something you're wrestling with. But for many, many years, I knew, even though I was a high-functioning addict, I had a ministry, I was doing lots of good, beautiful stuff, I was helping people, that was for real, very, very sincere, I was doing some good stuff, releasing a lot of music, but I had this issue in my life. And when something would come up that wasn't right, that didn't feel right, or I would feel down or whatever, immediately, part of it was, I guess, a sense of conviction or guilt or shame, all of which need to be dealt with. But just this awareness says, yeah, of course something's not right because I am out of alignment. I'm not completely listening to and responding to what I know is right. And again, you can judge me, but the real issue is there anything in your life, when you're honest with yourself, that you know is out of alignment with who you are most truly and most deeply? So it took me a long time before I was willing to finally say, wait a minute, I've got to deal with this. I have got to stop doing this. And then I realized I couldn't. It wasn't easy. And it's been quite a few years now since I have been engaged in that substance. And I go to an AA group on a very regular basis. And I have found the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. My substance was not alcohol, but I have found the principles of the 12 steps to be incredibly helpful. So I'm sharing that now just as an example of a way in which my life was not in alignment completely. And so when something wouldn't go well, I would be like, yeah, it's because I'm in my own way. So it wasn't until I became willing to put God first. I thought I was. I was in denial. I lied to myself for years, thinking I was completely surrendered to the Spirit. And in so many ways I was, but not when it came to this thing. So is there something in your life that you know you need to deal with? That you know you need to be willing to let go of? Or take a good look at and change your relationship with it or her or him or them? It's a very important question to ask if you really want to get to the heart of why things don't seem as good, as true, as alive, as full as they could. The fourth question is, am I trusting God with everything? I mean, it's one thing to name something that's out of alignment and to say, okay, and by the way, if there's something that's so important to you that you will not let God deal with it, then you're making an idol, a false god, little g, out of whatever that thing or that person, could be a person. If you're in a relationship that you know is not right for you, not healthy for you, not meant to continue, but you can't get out of it, that has an addictive component to it that you're going to need some help with. But if you're saying, okay, God, I'll do anything except give up him or her, them, or I'll do anything except have a boundary with that person, that's where you need to go. And I'm the first one to understand. I get how painfully, excruciatingly difficult it can be to do that. But this is like get real time. You really want to feel good deep down and have the freedom and the joy of being in alignment with God, then, we can't play games with this stuff. What is it that's in the way? So to me, another way of putting being in alignment with God is trusting God with everything. So that's that fourth question. Am I trusting God with everything? Another way of saying it is, am I trusting love? Do I really trust in love? Do I believe that if I focus everything and surrender everything and make love and being loving, being a loving being, make that the most important thing, am I going to lose something that I'm not willing to lose? A lot of us feel like, yeah, I'll trust God with everything except this, except that. And deep down, there's this fear that if I really trust everything to God, then God's going to take something away from me or make me do something or not do something that I can't do without. So again, you see where that becomes like a false deity, false God, small g. So this is really a question of what we're doing with our fears also. What are we most afraid of? And to get down and dirty with that question, so what's the worst that could happen if I put God first here? What might I lose that I'm so afraid of losing? What might I have to face that I'm so afraid to face? What might I have to admit to myself if I let God all the way in, if I make that the most important thing? And this is where at some point, for me in my journey, I realized that some kind of shift happened that changed everything for me. And that is that trusting God, deciding that God is going to be my number one priority, period. And again, you could substitute love for God. That's as much or more a choice and a decision than believing a set of propositions about God. And I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I believe in God. I believe there's something out there. I believe there's a higher power. I believe there's some mystery out there watching over. That's all sounds nice, and I don't doubt the truth of that. But what I'm saying is that's not deep enough to get to the heart of our fears and the things that really keep us up at night or that get in the way from us experiencing the fullness of the flow of love and the goodness of God in our lives. So deciding, at some point I just decided, okay, you know what, I am done questioning whether or not love is the most important. I'm done questioning or doubting whether or not that's all that really matters in the end, and I am making a choice to put that first. And nobody does this perfectly. I certainly don't. I lose my way sometimes. But it doesn't take long, thanks to the Spirit of God and the love of God and also community and people who support me. But it doesn't take long when I realize I am somehow putting something else in front of God in my life or afraid to trust God with everything. For a lot of us, it comes down to how we deal with money. It's interesting, isn't it, that the language that gets used in financial institutions is all faith-based language. We have a trust. We have securities. We have companies called Fidelity. What do we trust in? And it's ironic that on our money, it says, "In God we trust." Yeah, I think the majority of us trust the money more than we do God. Or it's like, okay, God, great, but I need the money. Yeah, and we do need money. I'm not saying we don't. But if you put money ahead of God, or your fear of not having enough ahead of your fidelity to love, we are asking for trouble when we do that. And it's not that God judges us or something. We wind up bringing problems into ourselves by creating false gods out of things that are not God. So, Nadia Bolz-Weber, some of you have probably heard of Nadia Bolz-Weber. She's a well-known Lutheran pastor and speaker and teacher, podcaster at times, or at least on a lot of podcasts. I don't know if she has her own, but she has a Substack, I think. But, very wise and gritty and funny, and, I love her. She's wonderful. She one time said, "The opposite of faith is not doubt. It's certainty." Being needing everything all wrapped up in some tidy bow. And a lot of people claim a degree of certainty when it comes to their faith, and this is the truth, and this is how it's got to be, and get very rigid about it, and everybody else is wrong. There can be such a thing as what has been named toxic certainty, being overly certain. There's a lot of toxic certainty in our political discourse these days, people that are too sure they're right, and to the point where they're not willing to listen to anybody. So we have to be careful. Something funky happens in us when we're too sure we're right, or too certain of our own perspective. But I've been studying Jewish Kabbalah a lot in recent years. And in Kabbalah, the sages, that the saints, the sources of wisdom, are traditionally referred to. The sages say that what we need, perhaps more than anything else, is what they refer to as absolute certainty that everything that's happening is somehow unfolding perfectly in and because of God. Now, that's a hard thing to take in, and I could push back against it. What about this or that? But I have really been spoken to deeply, realizing that from a perspective that we don't have access to, believing that love is everything. It is the Alpha, the beginning. It is the end. It's where we come from. It's the purpose of our being here. It's what we're here to learn and to grow and to realize and to become and to share with each other and to offer each other and to bring to the world, to bring to our ethics, to bring to our politics. It is everything. And when we die, we go home to love, and the journey continues. To have certainty that God is holding all of it, and that no matter what happens, we have certainty that somehow it will be used by God for the purpose of goodness and love. It doesn't mean that what happens is good, or that God is a puppeteer, puppet master, pulling the strings and making everything happen. It's not that. It's that everything unfolds within the purview and within the ultimate embrace of God, having certainty about that. And for me, that's as much of a choice In fact, more of a choice, a decision, than it is any kind of like guarantee that some evidence would prove to me. And years ago, I heard this anecdote, I think it was in a sermon, of a tightrope walker at Niagara Falls. So imagine a rope across Niagara Falls, and there's this famous tightrope walker and a big crowd because he's going to walk across this tightrope. And he has a wheelbarrow, and he's going to take that wheelbarrow across on the tightrope on Niagara Falls. And so before he's about to attempt it, he says to the crowd, do you believe I can do this? And people are pumping him up, and yes, we believe you can do this. And he says, okay, you believe I can do this. Who will get in the wheelbarrow? Of course, I would imagine, I don't think this really happened, but it's a good example. The crowd went quiet. And then the purpose of the illustration was only the person who will get in the wheelbarrow actually believes that the person can walk across that tightrope. And the analogy was to ask ourselves, are we in the wheelbarrow when it comes to our life, our faith in love with God? Are all of our eggs in that basket? Are we willing to risk everything and trust God with everything? Now, I love that, but radical trust doesn't mean to me that he's going to make it across the tightrope without falling. Radical trust, the kind that really changes everything, is the trust that says, and even if the worst happens, I will fall into the arms of God. I will fall into love. And so radical trust, the kind of trust that really sets us free, is moving from the fear-based posture of what if? What if the worst happens? What if this goes bad? What if that happens? And I'm not saying there's never a time to, take caution. But when it comes to trusting God, it's moving from what if this or that happens to even if this happens. In some way that I can't even imagine or see right now, I know it's all going to be okay in and with and because of God, because of love. When you know that, that's when you're free. And I'm not saying I'm there all the time, but I find myself, out on a rope with God a lot these days. I won't get into the specifics of my life, but, I'm pretty out there. Years ago, I took a trip to Haiti. It was my very first trip to Haiti. I have since, by the way, and I'll do some more podcasts on this another time, or ask me if you're curious about my work. For over 30 years, I've been working very closely with grassroots organizations in one of the poorest and most volatile parts of Haiti, just outside the capital city, a shanty town called Cité Soleil. Very dangerous and volatile place that Mother Teresa once referred to as the poorest place on the planet. And I went with an organization that had a relationship with the Sisters of Mother Teresa. And this was 1989 or so, but it was when the AIDS epidemic was really kicking into gear. And a lot of fear. And I will be honest and just share with you that my own father had AIDS at the time, and he eventually died from it. And so it was not an issue that was at a distance for me. It was emotionally important to me, and there was a lot of controversy in my own family about how AIDS is contracted. We knew how my dad got it, but should I spend time with my dad? What if it's an airborne thing? It was back in those days when we didn't know as much. And so I went to Haiti, and I was volunteering at a place called the Home for the Dying and the Destitute, where there were homeless men and women with AIDS and tuberculosis who were dying, and most of them didn't have families. And it was kind of a hospice of sorts. And Mother Teresa sisters would pick them up and take them into this place and lovingly care for them as they died. And so we went and spent time being present to and with these people who had AIDS and TB. And the rooms were ventilated, but still, I was nervous about it. And I wasn't sure it was safe. And was kind of angry that, what kind of risk am I taking? All that kind of stuff. And I went to one of the sisters and I said, "Sister, these guys have AIDS, right? A lot of them." And she said, "Yeah, most of them do." And I said, "Well, aren't you afraid you'll get it?" And she smiled at me with, if you've ever been with the Missionaries of Charity, you know that smile. She smiled and she said, "To the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any sister who has. But even if we got that, God would use that to glorify himself." And she said that with so much serenity and complete surrender and joy that the look on her face, it was just like, okay, whatever she's got, that kind of trust and surrender, willingness to let God be God, I want that. That's how I want to live my life. The last question, or no, it's second to last question actually, is, am I focusing on lack? And this could be an entire episode, and at some point will be. But am I focusing on something that, from my perspective, is missing? Something that, from my perspective, is wrong? Something I want that I don't have, or I don't have enough of, or someone I want that doesn't want me, or isn't with me, or whatever. Am I focusing on lack? And all I'll say is that the ego, the wounded, small self, false self, as Richard Rohr often puts it, ego, loves to focus on lack, on what's missing, on what we think should be happening and isn't happening, and loves to say, and who's to blame for that? Whose fault is that? And the ego loves to blame ourselves for that. I'm not doing something, I'm not being something, I'm not good enough at something, I am not enough. Am I focusing on lack? And this is where that Kabbalistic certainty wisdom is so important. And I've developed a little mantra that I just want to share with you, and it's this simple. There's no lack. I am not missing anything that is essential. If it were essential, God would see to it that I have it, that I have access to it. Or God is seeing to it that it is on the way right now. There is no lack. It's a rephrase. I've heard some of the Kabbalists rephrase the beginning of Psalm 23, where it says, "The Lord, the source, is my shepherd. I shall not want." Another way to translate it could be, God is my shepherd. There's no wanting. That doesn't mean we don't have desires. Desire is a beautiful, beautiful thing, but there's no lack of what is most needed. So I'll move toward a close now by sharing Richard Rohr's Easter message. I made it the Easter message at the church I was pastoring, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. He once said this, and he didn't come up with this. I can't remember where he got it, but it just goes like this. Maybe you've heard it before. I love this. In the end, everything's going to be all right. So if it's not all right, it's not the end. Take that in. In the end, everything's going to be all right. So if it's not all right, it's not the end. And knowing that and trusting that makes a huge difference. Whatever you're in the midst of, it's not over. And even if you have suffered or are suffering a terrible loss, a terrible change, maybe you're even facing your death, that's not the end. Maybe you've lost someone literally to death. That's not the end. Yes, I'm not going to minimize the grief and the incredible sorrow of losing that immediate relationship. Yes, of course. And please don't hear me as any way denying the depth and the power and the pain of that. But it's not the end. And you will not be stuck right where you are right now in unspeakable grief, perhaps. God is with you, and your journey is fluid. You are not going to stay where you are right now. So let me recap the questions. And there is one more, but the 5 so far. So first is, what's really going on? The second is, where am I in my spiritual growth? Third is, am I seeking God first? Question 4, am I trusting God with everything? And question 5, am I focusing on lack? And the last question is this, and I have to credit or attribute this question to my good friend, Brian McLaren. Maybe some of you know of Brian McLaren, an author, amazing guy, just a beautiful, better human being than he is an author, and also a beautiful songwriter. The question is this, how am I going to show up? And I give Brian credit for this question because I was leading a workshop with him one time, and we were talking about his book, Life After Doom. And it's about climate change. And he's very, very honest and basically suggesting that it might be too late, but ending by saying, but we don't know, let's do everything we can. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification of his book. Read the book. It's a stunning, beautiful book. But we were talking about it, and I said, where after all of this does it leave you? And people are always asking him, do you have any hope? And he said, this is one thing I wish I had said at the end of the book. I really don't know what the future holds, but I do know how I'm going to show up. He's going to show up committed to love, as someone who is embracing love and kindness and goodness and justice and the well-being of the earth, embracing that, being committed to that, giving all of his energy to a posture that says that's what's most important, and trusting love with all of it. That's how I'm going to show up. So, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know how I'm going to show up. And so that's the 6th question. How am I going to show up? So here's all 6, just to recap one more time. What's really going on? Where am I in my spiritual growth? Am I seeking God first? Am I trusting God with everything? Am I focusing on lack? Am I going to show up? Well, I hope this has been helpful to you. How are you showing up right now? You need some help? I mean, if something inside you says, I'd like to be in touch with this Brian Sergio guy, maybe working with him or talking to him would be helpful to me. I'm available to do some one-on-one stuff, so you can contact me. It's just briansergiobl@gmail.com. But I hope and pray this has been helpful, and God bless you. Big love, bless you, and trust in the presence of love and the goodness and certainty of God's good future.